Hello, fellow cyborgs, and welcome to my spring reading wrap up, where I tell you about some of the books I haven't yet talked about that I read in the months of March, April, and May. I can't remember which months it was, but there were quite a few booktubers who were reading The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and Return of the King and The Hobbit together, and they started in December, and they were reading one book a month. And so since there was a Tolkien thing going on BookTube, I decided I should probably get to those two audiobooks that I still had yet to read/listen to in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So I finished listening to The Two Towers and Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien. The Two Towers I ended up giving 3 out of 5 stars. I really liked this middle hump in the trilogy. I liked the story and the new characters we were introduced to. It was pretty entertaining and pretty easy to listen to and understand what was going on, having seen the movies multiple times while listening to it in my car on audiobook. So 3 stars for The Two Towers, but unfortunately, The Return of the King, which I was expecting to have huge amounts of payoff, didn't, and I gave this 2 out of 5 stars. I thought it was a really weak ending for a trilogy that I had pretty much suffered through for the last 2 books. Tolkien is not my favorite writer. I find his writing style dull. I don't like his dialogue. I don't particularly think that his characters are well fleshed out and feel like people. Obviously, there's a massive non-existence of women who matter in his books compared to all of the men. So I'm glad that I have now experienced the full trilogy as it was written. Obviously, listening on audiobook is a different experience, but it's the best I could do at this point. I don't think I'll ever love Tolkien, but I hope that in the future I can actually read them, take my time, and hopefully find something redeemable in it. But I am just not in the Tolkien camp. I don't really get it, and that's fine. Then I buddy read with Meryl from A Blackbird's Books Persuasion by Jane Austen, which was the final book in this wrap-up big volume that I needed to read. I gave Persuasion 3 out of 5 stars. I was really expecting to adore Persuasion, but I didn't. I think that part of the reason why is that for a lot of the book, at least like the first few opening chapters, and by few I mean at least 6, we really hear more about Anne Elliot's family members who are awful people than we do about Anne Elliot, and I was really hoping to hear more of an introvert's thought process and dealings with the society at this time. I didn't really get to know Anne all that well. And this was one of the problems I had with Mansfield Park, was that so much of the narrative was focused on characters other than Fanny, and they were all awful people, and I just didn't want to spend time reading about them. I think what's key with me enjoying Austen is I need to find something lovable or interesting or laughable about all of the side characters, including our main heroine, or it's just not going to work. And Emma has so far been the only Austen that I have read fairly recently that has done that, and I nearly loved Emma. I was this close to loving Emma. Unfortunately, Persuasion did not have enough side characters that I loved, which was a shame. I did really like the ending. I liked how things got wrapped up pretty much on stage rather than as a side note at the end of a novel, as was in Mansfield Park, which was really frustrating and unsatisfying for me. And I hope that in the future, now knowing what to expect with Persuasion, that I'll get more out of it. Overall, I just don't think I love Austen. I think that I can appreciate her work, but there's just not a visceral emotional connection between me and her writing. I have Sense and Sensibility left to read, and then I have read her 6 principal novels, and at least Austen has given me Emma, which was absolutely delightful, and I really want to reread sometime soon. So hopefully you'll be hearing my thoughts on Sense and Sensibility sometime later this year, hopefully. Meryl and I are hoping to do another buddy read. So yeah, Persuasion, Too bad. Hillary from Your Robot Friend and I buddy read Ghostland and American History and Haunted Places, and I believe we both ended up giving this about a 3-star rating. It was a fast-paced and easy-to-read nonfiction, but I think this book was mismarketed. The title Ghostland is really catchy, and it makes you think that you are going to be reading about ghost stories and then learning about American history through these individual ghost stories, but in fact, Ghostland is an American history in haunted places. The ghosts are not important. The fact that the place is haunted is what is important. And Colin Dickey comes at this from a much more academic viewpoint than I was expecting. So instead of talking about the different ghost stories that happen in a place, he'll mention a ghost story, immediately refute the fact that the details are based in truth and say that this is just a legend that's gone awry and become a thing. And then he'll talk about one of the great isms that sort of pertains to the locale. So for instance, with the Winchester Mystery House, the legend is that Mrs. Winchester, I think that was her name, that would make sense, she felt haunted by the ghosts of people killed by the Winchester rifle and was told by a medium that as long as she kept building her house, it would confuse the spirits and they wouldn't come after her and kill her, and that's why the house is sprawling and huge. But Colin Dickey asserts that this is more a commentary on feminism and the fact that women could not be architects at this time, and if I think it was Sarah Winchester, wanted to play around with architecture, she did it on her own dime, and people looked at her as a crazy old woman, and I don't understand very much. I thought that some themes were too big and kind of got away from him, and I really didn't like how all of the ghost stories that he spent time on, he immediately refuted with true fact and detail. I guess, wanted a little bit more of the mystery. At the beginning, he says he's not out to prove whether ghosts exist or not, but I thought that he was going to talk about ghosts more. Instead, he was talking about people and isms, and it was fine. This was a case of not what I was expecting, and it was still an interesting read, but yeah, I mean, like, keep that in mind if you think you're going to want to read this. You're not going to get ghost stories. You're going to get a little bit of academia that is perhaps more consumable than normal, but yeah, lots of isms. And yeah, so Ghostland by Colin Dickey. I also finished reading The Clay Girl. The last time I talked with you, I was still in the middle of reading this. I ended up giving The Clay Girl 4 out of 5 stars, and this was a book that Acacia Ives recommended to me, and I read it during the Book Buddy-a-thon that I participated with her. The reason why Clay Girl got 4 out of 5 stars is because I didn't know how dark this book was going to get, so I read it with a sense of dread coming forward. Every time I switched to a new chapter, I wasn't sure if it was going to cross a line and make me feel really icky. For me, this book never crossed that line. It never made me too uncomfortable. The abuse that happens in this book, the darkness that happens in this book happens off stage. The characters talk about it. We don't have to experience it with the characters, and experiencing abuse with characters is the thing that really sets my stomach off. So, knowing that this book does not go there, I think upon rereading this would probably get a 5-star from me. The beauty about The Clay Girl is that it turns a really weird, awkward time, in my opinion, in American history, which is the late 60s to 70s, where corruption's a thing, but hippies are also a thing. We have that weird time period going on, which kind of is not my favorite, and we have a character named Ari, who has an incredibly awful family life, at least biological family life. It's not good. It starts out bad, and it just kind of gets worse. But the beauty about this book is that Ari never gives into despair, and she is the most whimsical little thing ever. She has an imaginary friend named Jasper, who's a seahorse, who's with her making snide comments throughout all of these things. This was just a real joy to learn about Ari, and Ari, in fact, feels more like a person to me than some of the characters in War and Peace, which is a significantly longer piece of literature than The Clay Girl. If you love inventive, beautiful, poetic writing, then you need to read The Clay Girl. If you are interested interested in learning more about the 60s and 70s in Canada, then you need to read The Clay Girl. If you love reading about families, specifically dysfunctional families, you need to read The Clay Girl. And if you think that having an imaginary friend who is a seahorse named Jasper is an awesome thing, then you need to read The Clay Girl. I really highly recommend that you give this a try. It was such a pleasant surprise, such a breeze through the other kind of meh books that I've been reading lately, and I'm so thankful that Acacia made me read it. Then I listened to the audiobook of Madame Bovary, and this is the edition translated by Eleanor Marks Aveling. I listened to the audiobook that was narrated by Simon Vance. So I gave this book 2 out of 5 stars, but I think that I haven't really read Madame Bovary yet. I listened to the audiobook, but the writing style just made it really hard to focus on what was going on. And I found that there were some time jumps that if I was tuned out for 30 seconds, I was completely lost as to what was happening. I've read Madame Bovary. I know the gist of what's happened, but I need to in the future physically read this and pay attention more closely and then find my true opinion on the story. But overall, I wasn't that impressed with the characters. I certainly wasn't impressed with the writing style. And I also didn't like the ending. I found it kind of cliche. So yeah, there's something about the 2 very famous translated Woman Has an Affair and then Stuff books I didn't particularly like. And maybe I'm missing something. I don't know. Someone on Goodreads, thank you very much, recommended that I check out the 2005 movie adaptation, which I've yet to do. So I should do that, and then hopefully that will shed light on the story a bit more. But beautiful copy here, but disappointing story from what I have experienced so far. And finally, I want to talk to you about To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. I reread this, though the first time I read it was when I was 14, so it's been 13 years since I read To Kill a Mockingbird. I read this with Elaine from Books by Lanes. I really loved her recent video that told me how to actually say all of the words I was unsure about, so thank you for that, Elaine. So we decided to read To Kill a Mockingbird together because Elaine is awesome, and I'm really glad I read it with her because she felt similarly about this book that as I did. I gave this book 2 out of 5 stars, and in essence, I am so incredibly irritated by the fact that To Kill a Mockingbird is still in America supposed to represent a pinnacle of a book that talks about racial inequality. I feel like this is a really not great book about racial inequality. And the main thing that I hate about the fact that this is a thing is that it is written by a white person from a white perspective about white people. The black people in this book are objects or things that cause things to happen to the white people. If you are going to write a book about racial injustice, then the people of color need to be just as much people and characters as the white people in your book. And that's not what happens in here. The other thing I really don't like about To Kill a Mockingbird is that Harper Lee touches on a lot of isms. She touches on racism, she touches on classism, she touches on feminism, but never deals with them thoroughly. And for such a highly renowned classic that everybody reads, that's still taught in classrooms, I wanted to see these topics dealt with thoroughly, if not fully. You can't fully deal with these topics, but she just kind of, gives it to ya a little bit. And then I guess people have been impressed by her just touching on things. Elaine really well summarized my feelings about this book and why it just sits so uncomfortably with me in a realm of this is a book about racial injustice. She and I agreed that this is kind of a book about middle-class white people patting themselves on the back for not thinking racist thoughts and for wanting racial equality, while at the same time really not actively doing very much to change it. I know that I personally do the same thing, but I don't pat myself on the back about it. I recognize that I'm not actually doing anything to change anything, but at least I have the clarity of mind not to feel great about myself and not doing anything. I really hope that you guys are kind in the comment section, because I do not want to deal with people telling me how incredibly wrong I am and how I, didn't understand this book. We all have our opinions. This is mine. This is my channel, which is where I express my opinions. So if you have different opinions, please let me know in a kind, respectful manner in the comment section. I'll be happy to talk with you more about it. But overall, To Kill a Mockingbird, I don't get it. Not my favorite. Will never be my favorite. And yeah, so 2 out of 5 stars for To Kill a Mockingbird. So those were my opinions on a few of those books that I read during the month. I would love for you to tell me the most favorite book that you read in the month of spring. I know spring's not technically over, but this is just how I count as spring. Again, please be kind and respectful in the comment section. As always, you all are normally very good about doing that. So continue to be lovely, wonderful people. Thank you for watching, and until next time, continue to be lovely.